Hi, once again I'm Sydney and I am a servant of the Almighty God. I am also the author of Humanity's Inflection Point and my latest book, From Whence Cometh Intelligence. Today on the podcast I'd like to talk about the brotherhood of mankind. And I know it's something that, could be bantered around easily, but what I want to refer specifically to is how science and nature, which I refer to as the manifestation of God's omnipotence, is pointing us, showing us the way to have a true brotherhood of mankind. So to start with, you must take a look at, one of my episodes of the podcast, which relates to basically the intelligence that is everywhere, right? It's the podcast that refers to intelligence absolutely cannot, it cannot spontaneously occur. Intelligence must be built. So you must look at that podcast because that is what drives into everything else. Because what that does is, just as we accept the theory of evolution, we now will recognize the intelligence that even evolution it directs evolution. You see, we don't see any animals with horns coming out their sides or their legs, right? Everything in evolution is directed by intelligence, and it's not the sort of thing where it's a robot that, it's like a robot where someone is controlling. But we know now with software design, we can build systems that, like with machine learning, and again, our science is only a few hundred years old, and programming, well, even much younger than that. But what we see is intelligence, well-designed intelligence that adapts to external conditions. And if you pick up a copy of, From Whence Cometh Intelligence, I go into some of the details as to how this process can occur based on sensors, and sensors overloading and things adjusting automatically the intelligent programs. Now, this intelligence, the same intelligence we see that directs the evolutionary processes, we can see the same intelligence in the design of materials around us. When we look at neutrons and protons and electrons that make up the basic pieces of all the elements around us, and the forces that hold them together, so that we can have all the elements in the periodic table. And the fact that in 1859, Sir Charles Darwin came up with by observing nature, the manifestation of God's omnipotence, observing that and recognizing the evolution of the species, we can also, 10 years later, Dmitri Mendeleev, in a dream, a vision, he received what we know now as the periodic table of elements, which took us into this logical thing, and that is basic to almost everything around us. Everything, all compounds, all the things that we make, steel, even, and I worked in a refinery many years ago, so even the products that we use, like the gasoline and all of that stuff, all of that comes from that understanding what the elements in that periodic table. Okay, so what we see, it's intelligent design even of those elements in the periodic table, the ability to create compounds based on ionic and covalent bonds and all the things that go into the chemistry and the physics. All of these things, when we think about it, there is a logic to all of this. There is no random anywhere. Okay, so what we see is now nature and science is showing us that these things work for all of us. So just as some of the guiding principles, right, that I received years ago, going into almost 20 years ago, our science reveals God's methods. And so 20 years ago, and now it's coming full circle for me, because now I understand all of these things that we see, that we discover, and remember, we discover them. They were already there. So it's the dedication of individuals that reveals these things to us. Our science reveals God's methods. So all of these things now are showing us that there's a commonality. And when now recognizing that intelligence had to be designed, had to be built, we must realize there is, what in many cultures was referred to as the Great Spirit, the designer, the creator. And as we look at nature now and we look at science, that joins all of us. It joins all of us, because no one denies, and says, well, a computer works differently from me, or medicine. These things join all of us. Now, if we step back from the very beginning, and I know there are some parts of, I guess, pseudoscience that denies, spirituality, but from the beginning, we feel that great spirit, that spirituality, that's part of each of us. And from that came the commandments, the rules that apply to all of us. It's like we understand now the rule of law. The laws that apply to everyone, and no one is above those laws. That is the basic principle that can bring all of us together. Now, does that mean that one culture has to be supersede another? No, it does not. It's that whole thing of do as you be done by. And so we can preserve our cultures. We can preserve our the differences that are part of cultures. Unfortunately, though, there is one aspect of culture that we have to take a good look at. And which is that? It's religion. Religion, unfortunately, is the most divisive force on the planet. Why? Because we come in, and in spite of that, man takes it and starts twisting it to fit their, it's a classic example. I was raised as a Christian, and so with Christianity, we should all follow the example of Christ. But how often we hear things being quoted from Romans and this and all these, it's like, no, follow the example, and that would solve it. But man does do this. They take these things and they twist them, and they insert their own clans, and so they create these artificial structures. But if we strip all of these things away, like nature does, nature does not care about it. It applies to everyone, rich, poor, regardless of what corner of the world, right? Nature strips away all these artificial things and says, the seasons are there for you, the plants, the animals, the whole entire hierarchy we can understand, we can benefit from, regardless of where. And this is the sort of thing that under basic commandments, basic love and do as you be done by, we can have this true brotherhood of mankind. Because now, one of the important things, and I think that it's not emphasized enough, is that we all exist in the presence of that great spirit. And so those rules apply to us on a daily basis, regardless of where we are. Those rules apply to us. And so we must treat others as we want to be treated. That's the basic thing. This goes across every corner of this earth. One of the things I have to emphasize is that, and I've written it in Humanity's Inflection Point, we have to look at autocracies. Autocracies, and there's a chapter, they basically are demonic. Because autocracies, they subvert the will of all individuals except one. The one, And so in our systems, all our systems should have leaders that are impeachable. All our systems. And we cannot accept the rules based on an individual. They must be based on principles. Just as we have the commandments, those are unchanging, those are principles. And so when we have leaders who violate, who try to change these, we must be able to impeach them, to say, no, you no longer are qualified to lead, because these guiding principles are the basic foundation, and if you violate that, everything will crumble. And so whenever you have autocracies, and think about them, both religious and political, the guy at the top, you can't even approach a discussion of, is it right, is it wrong? And whereas they should be impeachable. We should be able to say, no, you are violating the fundamental principles of this state, organization, whatever. And we must then question and be able to say, no, you are no longer qualified to lead. And so these are basic things that we would put us without changing our cultures and customs around the world. But we can have this basic thing of love, of understanding, of recognizing the importance and having respect for each individual, because we exist. We all exist in the presence of that great creator who designed and installed the intelligence that drives everything in our known universe. From the very forces, that the subatomic forces, all the way to the very intelligence that enables us to learn and now feel that we are masters of everything around us. Right? That intelligence came from, and again, you have to look at a podcast, that intelligence cannot spontaneously occur. It must be built. Right? And when you understand, again, spread the word. But we can now start looking towards building that brotherhood of mankind, because nature, because science says this is something that joins us all. These principles. This is what I'm talking about, and it may take a while, because science, like all structures, once established, I'm sure it took quite a while for the theory of evolution to take hold. But there is a part that's missing, and this is the recognizing the intelligence that goes along with the physical changes. That brings us to that creator spirit, the designer, the architect of all that we observe. And based on that, we can see, oh, these rules apply to us the same way everywhere on this planet. This teaches us that there is an interdependency, just as we have, when we look at in the animals or plants. If one animal starts overgrazing, then the food supply goes away, and it's self-correcting, right? We see the same thing now, where we create things and we are filling the atmosphere with plastics and chemicals that may go against us. The system is built to, and again, that's the intelligence. You build it to correct. We are not there. So when we build things now, we just create a bunch of garbage. But if you look out in nature, the manifestation of his omnipotence, we see everything. It dies, it gets recycled. Everything, it grows, there are cycles, everything is accounted for. From plankton to whales, we see that whole dependency. All throughout nature, we see the plants, we see, and the different, even with the seasons, we see, plants having that intelligence to know to hibernate, and like I talked about in, my latest book, I go into details in some of these, really intricate processes like hibernation and all of the intelligence that's required for that. But all of this brings us to recognizing that equality that we can have, because nature shows us that even with diversity there is a dependency, and we, with our intelligence, our understanding of this, can start moving towards recognizing the Creator Spirit, the Almighty, and the rules that are implemented throughout nature applies to all of us, and we all have this interdependency. So these are the guidelines where we don't elevate autocrats. We say no, we have principles, not individuals, not persons. We are about principles, because the principles were given to us, right? Love each other, do as you be done by. So these are the guiding principles that would tie us all from every corner of this earth. So we know that there are leaders who will say, no, we are different. It's like, how? How are we so different? And you hear, especially again, religion, they give you this thing, and maybe you wear these clothes, and you be like, you are somehow different. The laws don't apply to you. The commandments that were given to you don't apply. When we have preachers and clerics and rabbis that issue these new things, they are not aware that we exist in the presence of the Almighty, and He gave us unchanging rules, of what we call the laws of nature. Those are examples of unchanging rules. These are additional tenets that I have been given, which led into all of this. Our science reveals God's methods. The key to meeting God's expectation of us is self-control, not controlling anyone else, ourself. That's the key to meeting His expectation, because then, I like to use the example of alcohol, right? If you can have all that around you, all the alcohol, all the drugs, with self-control, you don't have to partake of any of it. You could, all, greed and lust and hate and all of these things, with self-control, you can rise above that. And then the third tenet that was given to me is diversity is His. As servants, we must, right, recognize and honor His diversity. That again brings us back to this brotherhood. We recognize that diversity is His, regardless of skin color or whatever and the differences of culture. We all recognize this is part of His diversity. Just like He gives us flies and mosquitoes and snakes and birds and fish, He delights in diversity. We can also recognize that. Recognize in peoples and cultures, He delights in diversity. And again, when I say this Creator Spirit, it starts with the recognition, and eventually science will recognize that the theory of evolution, which is one of the cornerstones of our current, current modern civilization, there is a part missing. The part that was missing is recognizing the intelligence, and that the fact that that intelligence it absolutely cannot spontaneously come to life. It can't. And the fact that every creature has a custom version of that intelligence. When science, over time, science will recognize this, but it must lead to that recognition that all of this, the nature itself, is built for all of us. And this is some of the basic things that we need to start moving towards that true brotherhood of mankind. Recognize it is the intent of the Creator, that with knowledge, as our knowledge grows, not only do we become better at using the science that we discover, but that we also recognize it is His will that we honor His diversity and move towards that brotherhood of mankind, rejecting all autocracies, because then they do not recognize or honor the will, the individual, God-given rights that He gave us to have our own will. And so these principles could be the guiding thing that leads us, just as science and nature is. It leads us all so that eventually, regardless of where we go on this planet, we can recognize, truly recognize our brothers and sisters and honor them because we recognize we are in His presence and that the principles are forever. Those principles are meant to uplift us, to bring our humanity out and bring us together under the spanner of the true brotherhood of humanity. I want to thank you for taking the time to observe this, and I remind you it's not a coincidence that you came upon this, right? So take some time. I'd love if you would purchase copies of the book and spread the word that here is the defining thing that brings evolution back to recognizing the Creator, because there is a piece that was missing, and that piece was recognizing the intelligence. We couldn't, Darwin couldn't do that back in 1859. Now that we are doing and building our own intelligence, so take the time, review that podcast, and now recognize that as we move forward, we can learn from all of this and elevate all of humanity and our entire civilization. Again, thank you for taking the time, and until next time, may God bless us all. Thanks.